I want you to think about a question. If someone told you that a disaster was coming, a very specific disaster, in a very specific place, at a very specific time, would you believe them? Not a vague warning. Not something you could explain away as a lucky guess. I mean a specific prediction. A specific date. A specific location. A specific kind of event. Would you believe them? Most of us would say no. Most of us would find reasons to dismiss it. We would say the person is guessing. We would say it is coincidence. We would say there must be an explanation. And most of the time, we would be right. Most predictions are wrong. Most people who say they know the future are mistaken or dishonest. The history of prophecy is mostly a history of failure. But I want to tell you tonight about two cases that are harder to dismiss. Two people who appeared online, at specific moments, and said specific things about the future, things that, in some very striking cases, turned out to be true. I am not going to tell you they were time travelers. I cannot tell you that. I do not know what they were. Nobody does. What I can tell you is what they said. And what happened. And let you sit with the question. Let me start with what you need to understand about where this story begins. In Japan, there is an internet forum called 2CH. It is one of the oldest and largest online discussion boards in the world. It was started in 1999 and quickly became a central part of Japanese internet culture. People post on 2CH anonymously, completely anonymously, which means you know nothing about the person who is writing to you. No name. No profile. No history. Just the words they post. This anonymity creates something interesting. When someone posts something unusual on 2CH, the only evidence you have is what they write. You cannot look them up. You cannot verify who they are. You can only evaluate the content of what they say. In November 2010, an anonymous user appeared on 2CH. They did not introduce themselves normally. They did not say hello or explain who they were. They just started posting. And what they posted was unusual. They said they were from the year 2062. Now, before I continue, I want to acknowledge something. If you are listening to this and thinking, this sounds like obvious nonsense, this sounds like the kind of thing anyone could post online as a joke or a game, I understand that reaction. That is a completely reasonable reaction. Someone claiming to be from the future on an anonymous internet forum sounds like exactly the kind of thing that happens on anonymous internet forums all the time. I want you to hold that reaction. Keep it. Do not put it down. But also keep listening. Because what happened next is the part that is harder to explain. The person who called themselves 2062 did not make a long list of predictions. They did not describe technology or give details about future events in a way that sounded like science fiction. What they did was different. They answered questions. Ordinary people on 2CH asked them questions, and they answered. And their answers were careful and specific and sometimes strange. Someone asked, "What year are you from?" They said, 2062. Someone asked, "What is Japan like in 2062?" They said, "Japan still exists, but it has changed significantly. The capital is no longer Tokyo. It has moved to Okayama." Someone asked, "Why did the capital move?" They did not give a specific answer. They said there were reasons. Geographic reasons. Historical reasons. They said people who were living through it would understand. Someone asked, "What about China?" They said, "China as a country no longer exists in 2062. What was China has been absorbed. Primarily by India." Someone asked, "When does that happen?" They said, "It is the result of a long process. A conflict. It begins before 2030. And then, after a few days, they disappeared. They just stopped posting. The thread continued without them. People speculated. People dismissed it. People made jokes. The thread eventually became inactive. That was November 2010. For months later, on March 11, 2011, at 2:46 in the afternoon, the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan struck the northeastern coast. The Tohoku earthquake. Magnitude 9.1. The tsunami that followed it reached heights of 40 meters in some places. Nearly 20,000 people died or were never found. The date was March 11, 2011. For months after the anonymous user had appeared on 2ch. Now, I want to be careful here. I am not saying the 2062 person predicted the Tohoku earthquake. They did not specifically say an earthquake was coming. They did not give a date. They did not warn anyone. But here is the thing that people noticed when they went back and looked at the thread after the earthquake. The person from 2062 had appeared in November 2010, said strange things about Japan's future, and then disappeared. And then, for months later, Japan's future changed. People went back to the thread. They read it differently. They started asking, did this person know something? Was there something in what they said that should have warned us? And then they noticed something else. In the thread, someone had asked, will there be more earthquakes in Japan? The person from 2062 had answered, Japan will continue to face significant seismic events. This is part of why things change. The geography of Japan changes people's decisions about where to live and where the center of things should be. They had mentioned the geography of Japan. They had mentioned where the center of things should be, which is how they were describing the capital moving from Tokyo to Okayama. They had not said, there will be an earthquake in March. But they had described a Japan whose future was shaped by geological events. And geological events came. This is the quality of the prediction that makes it interesting. It is not clear enough to be definitive. It is not vague enough to be meaningless. It sits right in the uncomfortable middle. The place where you cannot easily decide. And then the person from 2062 came back. In July 2011, for months after the earthquake, the same anonymous posting style appeared on 2ch again. Someone noticed the pattern of the posts and asked, are you the same person from November? They said, yes. And then they said something that would not become significant until 5 years later. Someone asked, when will you come back again? They said, I should be back around April 15, 2016. April 15, 2016. That is the date they gave. And then they said something else. They said, when I come back, you should already know what I mean. Something will have happened that you will understand when you think about this conversation. They disappeared again. I want you to remember that date. April 15, 2016. We will come back to it. We will come back to it because of what happened on April 14, 2016. One day before the date they gave. Rest now. Let the question sit. The forum is dark. The posts are old. The person has not been heard from since. And somewhere in those old posts, a date is written. April 15, 2016. Sleep is close. But before you go, remember the date. I want you to picture the internet in 2010. It was different back then. Social media was still young. Twitter was 3 years old. Facebook was just starting to spread beyond college campuses. And in Japan, there was this forum, 2channel. If you don't know 2channel, think of it like a massive, anonymous message board. Anyone could post anything. No usernames. No accountability. Just text on a screen. And because of that, it was full of garbage. Trolls, jokes, rumors, nonsense. But it was also one of the few places where something genuinely strange could surface and people might actually pay attention. Because in November of 2010, someone posted on 2channel. And what they wrote was strange. Not strange like a conspiracy theory. Not strange like someone ranting about the government. Strange in a very specific, very calm way. They said they were from the future. Now, before you close the tab, I know what you're thinking. People claim to be from the future all the time. It's one of the oldest internet jokes. Someone says I'm from the year 3000, and let me tell you, flying cars are overrated. And everyone laughs and moves on. But this person wasn't doing that. They weren't describing flying cars. They weren't talking about alien contact or technological miracles. What they described was quiet. Mundane, almost. The kind of future that feels like an extension of now, not a leap into science fiction. And that's what made it different. They said they were from the year 2062. And they said they had come back because they wanted to warn people. Not the whole world. Not governments or scientists. Just ordinary people, on an anonymous Japanese message board, reading their post in the middle of the night. Why? Why there? Why then? That's something we're going to come back to. But I want you to sit with the initial reaction people had to this post. The first wave of replies was what you'd expect. Laughter. Mockery. Prove it. What's the winning lottery numbers? The usual. Because that's what we do. When something doesn't fit inside what we consider possible, we push it away. We make jokes. We protect ourselves from the discomfort of taking it seriously. And the person from 2062 didn't get angry about that. They just kept talking. They answered questions. Carefully. They said things like, I can't tell you everything. There are things I'm not allowed to say. There are things that would change too much if I said them. But here is what I can share with you. And what they shared was a list. Not a dramatic list. Not the world will end or a great war is coming. Just a list of events. Some of them sounding almost ordinary. Some of them pointing to very specific things in the near future of 2010. And then, in 2011, they came back. July 2011. The same username. The same calm tone. They posted again. And they referenced something that had happened in March of that year. Something that no one in November 2010 could have predicted. Something that had shocked the entire world. I want you to think about what it means to predict something like that. Not in vague terms. Not there will be suffering in the East or some cryptic phrase that could mean anything. But something specific enough that, when you read the original 2010 post and then look at what happened in March 2011, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. That's what we're dealing with here. And I want to walk through it slowly, because I think if we rush, we miss something important. We miss the texture of this story. We miss the details that make it either the most remarkable coincidence in internet history or something else entirely. So let's go back to that first post. November 2010. What exactly did this person say? They introduced themselves simply. No fanfare. No dramatic setup. They said, I am from the year 2062. I have information that may be useful to some of you. I will answer questions when I can. And then they waited. The thread filled up slowly at first. A few curious replies. A few insults. And then, as more people found the thread, it started to grow. People began asking real questions. Not prove it questions. Real questions. Questions about the future. About Japan. About what the world would look like in 50 years. And the answers were strange. Not because they were outlandish. but because they were so specific, and so calm, and so consistent. The person never contradicted themselves. Even as the questions got more pointed, even as people tried to trip them up, the story never changed. The details stayed the same. And that consistency, that quiet, steady consistency, is part of what made people keep coming back to read. Let me tell you why the format of these posts matters. One of the things researchers noticed early on was that the 2062 person's writing style was unusual for 2-channel. 2-channel, like most anonymous forums, tends toward chaos. Short posts, aggressive replies, people trying to one-up each other. The culture rewards wit and cruelty, not patience. The 2062 person was patient, in a way that felt almost out of place. They would write long responses. They would address questions carefully. When someone insulted them, they didn't fire back. They just acknowledged the doubt and continued. There was a quality to the writing that some people later described as tired. Not angry. Not excited. Just tired. Like someone who had made this journey and knew it was probably pointless, but was doing it anyway because it was the right thing to do. That quality, that specific texture of exhausted sincerity, is hard to fake. You can fake confidence. You can fake mystery. You can fake the dramatic pauses and the I know things you don't know energy of a typical internet hoaxer. But tired sincerity? That's a specific emotional note. And the 2062 person hit it consistently across all 3 of their appearances. November 2010. July 2011. December 2012. Same tone. Same patience. Same sense of someone carrying a weight they didn't ask to carry. There's one more thing about that first post I want to tell you. When someone asked the 2062 person why they had come to 2-channel, of all places, of all times, they gave an answer that has stayed with me. They said something like, because this is where ordinary people speak honestly. In the future, we study this period. Not the news. Not the official records. The forums. The places where people said what they actually thought, without filters. I want you to think about that framing. In 2062, historians are reading 2-channel posts from 2010 the way we read diaries from World War II. The way we read letters from the trenches. Because that's where the truth lived. Not in the newspapers. Not in the press releases. In the anonymous posts of ordinary people who had no reason to lie. And so someone came back to that place, to those ordinary people, to try to warn them. I don't know if that's true. But as a story, as a way of understanding why a time traveler would choose an anonymous Japanese message board, it makes a strange kind of sense. Let me tell you what happened on April 14, 2016. At 9:26 p.m. local time, an earthquake struck Kumamoto, in the southern part of Japan. Magnitude 6.2. Strong enough to shake buildings, strong enough to cause damage. The ground shook for less than a minute. And then it stopped. And people breathed. And they thought, that was bad, but it is over. It was not over. Less than 28 hours later, a second earthquake struck the same area. This one was larger. Magnitude 7.0. The kind of earthquake that arrives without warning in the dark hours of the morning, when people are asleep in their homes. April 14th. April 15th. The date the person from 2062 had written in July 2011, 5 years earlier. I should be back around April 15th, 2016. When I come back, you should already know what I mean. Something will have happened. 49 people died in the Kumamoto earthquakes. More than 2,000 were injured. Kumamoto Castle, one of the most beautiful historical castles in Japan, built in the 16th century, was severely damaged. Parts of it that had stood for 400 years collapsed in seconds. And the date was April the 14th and 15th, 2016. Now, I want to think through this carefully with you, because I think the way you think about this matters. The skeptical case is clear. Someone posted on an anonymous forum in July 2011 saying they would return in April 2016. This could be a random date chosen for reasons we do not know. Japan has earthquakes regularly. The probability that some seismic event would occur somewhere in Japan around any given date is high. The person did not say specifically that an earthquake would happen. They said something would happen that we would understand. That is vague enough to be applied retroactively to almost anything. All of this is true. All of this is a fair argument. And yet, let me tell you what the person from 2062 said in December 2012 when they appeared for a third time. By December 2012, people were watching. After the Tohoku earthquake and the Kumamoto prediction, after two events that seemed to correspond to what the 2062 person had hinted at, there were people who were tracking this account. People who saved the posts. People who were paying attention. In December 2012, the person from 2062 returned to 2CH and answered more questions. Someone asked, "What is the most important thing you can tell us?" They said, "The most important thing is to understand that the things you think are permanent are not permanent. Countries are not permanent. Cities are not permanent. The places you consider the center of things will not always be the center." Someone asked, "What about war?" They said, "There will be conflict. Significant conflict. The kind that reorganizes the world." Not yet. But the seeds of it are being planted now. Someone asked, "Can you be more specific?" They said, "Asia will be the center of the most significant conflict. The relationship between China, Japan, and India will be central to what happens." By 2062, the map looks different. Asia looks different. Someone asked, "Does Japan survive?" They said, "Yes. Japan survives. Japan changes. The Japanese people are still there. But where the center is, that changes." Someone asked, "Where is the center in 2062? They said, again, Okayama. And then they were gone. December 2012 was the last time the person from 2062 was heard from. I want to stay with the Okayama detail for a moment. Because of everything they said, this is the one I find most specific and most strange. Okayama is a real city. It is in the Chugoku region of Western Honshu, Japan's main island. It is not a major city by Japanese standards. It is not famous internationally. If you were making up a future capital of Japan, you might guess Tokyo, which is already the capital. You might guess Osaka, Japan's second largest city. You might guess Kyoto, the ancient imperial capital. Okayama would not be an obvious choice. It is a mid-sized city known primarily for its garden, one of the three most celebrated gardens in Japan, and not much else by international standards. Why Okayama? The person from 2062 hinted at a reason without stating it fully. They mentioned geographic reasons. They mentioned decisions made after significant events. People who have thought about this have offered an explanation. Okayama has a specific geographic property that Tokyo does not. It is one of the cities in Japan least vulnerable to tsunami damage. It is inland, shielded by surrounding geography, in a region with lower seismic risk than eastern Japan. If Japan experienced major disasters in its eastern regions, if Tokyo became uninhabitable or significantly damaged, and if the government needed to move the center of administration somewhere safer, Okayama would be a logical choice. This is speculation. But it is specific speculation. It is the kind of speculation that requires knowledge of Japanese geography and disaster risk. It is not the kind of thing you would say if you were just making things up. And then there is the question of the December 2012 appearance. Because there is something in those posts that I want to draw your attention to. Someone asked, "What can you tell us about the next few years?" The years leading up to 2020? The person from 2062 said there will be a period of uncertainty. Global systems will be stressed. Economic systems. Political systems. Things that people consider stable will appear less stable. This was December 2012. The decade that followed, 2013 to 2022, included the Brexit vote, the rise of populist movements across the world, the COVID-19 pandemic which stressed every global system simultaneously, and levels of geopolitical tension not seen since the Cold War. None of this is specific. The person from 2062 did not say, there will be a pandemic in 2020. They did not name specific events. They said global systems would be stressed. That is general enough that it can fit almost any turbulent period. And yet, when you read the posts with the knowledge of what actually happened, it is unsettling. Not because it proves anything, but because it fits. The Tohoku earthquake. The Kumamoto earthquake. The date in April 2016. The Okayama capital. The stressed global systems. All of it sits in the same uncomfortable zone. Too specific to dismiss completely. Not specific enough to confirm. And then someone else appeared. Not from 2062. From somewhere further away. From 2075. And the first thing this new person said, the first specific claim they made, came true within 2 months of them posting it. We are going to meet this second person now. And what makes them important is not just what they said. It is what they said that was the same as the person from 2062. Because they had no way to know about each other. They appeared years apart. On different platforms. In different languages. With no apparent connection. And they agreed on the same things. Breathe slowly. The forum is dark. The posts are old. But the information in them is still there. Waiting for someone to notice what it says. Let me take you to March 11th, 2011. It's 2:46 in the afternoon. Japan Standard Time. And the ground starts to move. I don't think I need to describe what happened next in great detail, because most of you know. The earthquake measured 9.0 on the Richter scale. The largest earthquake ever recorded in Japan's history. It triggered a tsunami. That tsunami reached heights of 40 meters in some places. It swept entire towns off the map. And it triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster, the worst nuclear incident since Chernobyl. Nearly 20,000 people died. Now, go back to that 2-channel post from November 2010. The person from 2062 had not said, a great natural disaster is coming. They had not said, Japan will suffer. They had not said anything that vague. What they said was more specific than that. They referenced seismic activity in the Tohoku region. They said that in the near future as of 2010, Japan would experience something that would change the country. They said it in a way that seemed, in November of 2010, almost unremarkable. Because Japan always has earthquakes. Everyone knows Japan has earthquakes. So it's easy to dismiss a reference to earthquakes as nothing meaningful. Until March 11th, 2011. And then suddenly, you go back and read that post with different eyes. That's the thing about predictions, isn't it? We only recognize them after the fact. Before they come true, they sound like noise. After they come true, they sound like prophecy. And the human mind is very good at finding patterns after the fact. Very good at connecting dots that may or may not actually be connected. I know that. I'm aware of it. And I'm not asking you to set that awareness aside. What I'm asking you to do is keep it in mind and keep reading. Because the 3.11 earthquake is just the beginning. The second prediction, the one that really makes people stop and think, came in the summer of 2012. The person from 2062 returned again. Third visit. And this time, they were more specific. They said there will be a large earthquake in the Kyushu region, in the area around Kumamoto. It will happen in April, around the 15th. The year, they said, would be within the next 5 years from now. They posted this in 2012. Now I want you to do the math. 5 years from 2012. That takes us to 2017 at the latest. April. Around the 15th. Kumamoto region. On April 14, 2016, at 9:26 in the evening, a magnitude 6.5 earthquake struck Kumamoto Prefecture. It was the foreshock. 2 days later, on April 16, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake, the main shock, hit the same region. The epicenter, Kumamoto. The month, April. The date range, the 14th through the 16th. The year, 2016. Within the 5-year window. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Around April 15th. The earthquake hit on April 14th and April 16th. 1 day before and 1 day after the predicted date. In the exact region that was named. In the exact month that was named. Within the exact time window that was given. What are the odds? I mean that as a genuine question. Not a rhetorical one. What are the actual statistical odds that someone guessing randomly in 2012 would name Kumamoto, April, around the 15th, within 5 years? Japan has earthquakes all the time. That's true. But a magnitude 7.3 earthquake in a specific prefecture in a specific month within a specific 5-year window, that's not a vague prediction. That's a precise one. And it came true. Now, people who try to debunk this point out, we only know about this prediction because it came true. There are probably thousands of failed predictions on 2 channel that no one remembers because nothing happened. And that's a fair point. That's a genuinely fair point that we should take seriously. But here's what makes this different. The original posts still exist. They were archived. People can go back and verify the timestamps. This is not a case of someone saying I predicted this after the fact. The record is there. The dates are there. And the dates on the posts predate the earthquakes by years. So what do we do with that? I don't have a clean answer. What I have is the next part of the story. Because as remarkable as the 2062 person's predictions were, the story doesn't end there. It gets stranger. Because in 2018, someone else appeared. Someone who said they were from an even further future. Someone whose predictions overlapped with the 2062 persons in ways that are deeply unsettling, because there is no apparent connection between the two of them. But we'll get to that. First, let me tell you about the other things the 2062 person said. The things that haven't happened yet, or the things we can't verify yet. Because predictions that point to the future are interesting in a different way than predictions that have already come true. They said, Japan's capital will move. Not Tokyo. Somewhere in western Honshu. They didn't name a specific city, but they were clear that the center of Japanese government and culture would shift westward. They said, paper will become rare. Not immediately. Not within a decade. But in the course of the next 50 years, physical paper, the kind you hold in your hands, the kind you write on, would become genuinely scarce. A luxury item, almost. They said, China, as we know it today, would cease to exist as a unified nation. And they said, there would be a third world war before 2030. Some of these feel terrifying. Some of them feel almost mundane. The paper one, especially, we're already moving in that direction. Digital documents. Screens everywhere. Kids who grow up barely touching a physical book. But the capital move. The end of China. The World War before 2030. I want you to remember those. Because we're going to need them later. I want to address something directly, because I think if I don't, you'll be thinking about it the whole time. Confirmation bias. This is the tendency to notice information that confirms what we already believe, and ignore information that contradicts it. And in the context of time traveler predictions, it's a real and serious concern. Here's how it works: if someone makes 20 predictions, and 2 of them come true, we remember the 2 that came true. The other 18 fade. We don't track them. We don't build a ledger. We just notice the hits and forget the misses. Is that what's happening here? Maybe. Probably, in some degree. The 2062 person said many things. The 3.11 earthquake and the Kumamoto earthquake are the ones that get discussed, because they came true. The prediction about China ceasing to exist hasn't happened yet. The prediction about WWI before 2030 hasn't happened yet. The prediction about the capital moving hasn't happened yet. So right now, the scoreboard looks like this: 2 confirmed hits, several unresolved, 0 confirmed misses that are verifiable. That's not the same as a clean record. It's just an unresolved one. And here's the honest thing: the 2 confirmed hits are the dramatic ones. Earthquakes. Specific dates. Specific locations. That's exactly the kind of prediction that should be hardest to get right by chance. Japan has earthquakes, yes, but a magnitude 7.3 earthquake in Kumamoto, in April, within a 5-year window, is not something you predict randomly. Unless you had a very good reason to think it was coming. What reasons could there be? 1. Geological data. In 2012, were there geological warning signs pointing to elevated seismic risk in Kumamoto? Maybe. Geologists study fault lines. They track stress accumulation. Is it possible someone with access to geological research data could have made an educated prediction about Kumamoto? I looked into this. The Hinagu fault system and the Futagawa fault system, which caused the 2016 earthquakes, were known to exist. They were on the hazard maps. But predicting a specific earthquake on a specific fault at a specific time in a specific year is not something geologists were able to do in 2012. Or now, honestly. Earthquake prediction is still one of the hardest problems in science. So educated geological speculation doesn't fully account for the precision. 2. Luck. Pure coincidence. Against long odds, the prediction happened to be right. 3. Foreknowledge. I'm going to let all 3 of those sit there, and I'm going to move on, because I think the honest position is that we cannot determine, from the outside, which is true. What we can do is keep tracking. Keep the ledger. Note when predictions are made, note when they come true, note when they don't. Because the next big predictions from the 2062 person are time-sensitive. WWI before 2030. The capital of Japan moving. China fragmenting. We'll know more in the next 4 years. That's an uncomfortable position to be in. Waiting. Watching. Not knowing. But I think it's the honest position. And I'd rather be honest with you about the uncertainty than give you a clean narrative that isn't actually clean. The 2062 person gave us a timeline. We're living inside that timeline right now. And we have a few years left to see if the bigger predictions resolve. In January 2018, someone appeared online using the name YJ. They did not appear on 2CH. They used a different platform. They wrote in Chinese, not Japanese. They presented themselves in a matter-of-fact way, not dramatic, not desperate, not like someone trying to get attention. They said they were from the year 2075. Now, before I tell you what they said, I want to tell you what they said first. Their first specific prediction. The thing that, above everything else, made people pay attention. They said, China is going to lose a satellite soon. That is what they said. Not vaguely. They said China will lose a satellite. It will fall. The loss will be significant. They said this in January 2018. On March 31, 2018, 2 months later, China's Tiangong-1 space station re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. Tiangong-1 was China's first space laboratory. It had been launched in 2011. It had been used for a series of crewed missions. It was a significant piece of Chinese space infrastructure. And in 2016, China acknowledged that it had lost control of it. The space station was going to fall. They did not know exactly when or where it would land. On March 31, 2018, it re-entered the atmosphere and burned up over the southern Pacific Ocean. This happened 2 months after YJ said China would lose a satellite. Now, you can make arguments about this. China losing control of Tiangong-1 was already known. It had been reported in 2016. YJ could have read about it and calculated that it would fall in the early months of 2018 based on publicly available information about its orbital decay. This is a reasonable argument. It does not require any supernatural explanation. But the people who were paying attention to YJ noted something else. Something that required no technical knowledge to predict. Something that would require knowledge of the future. YJ said, the date of the fall and the circumstances of it will be significant in China. Not because of the satellite itself. Because of what the satellite's fall coincides with. Because of the political timing. This is strange to say about a satellite whose uncontrolled re-entry was expected but whose exact date was not known. YJ is saying that the specific date the satellite falls will matter. That the political context of that moment will give the event significance beyond just the technical loss of a spacecraft. Tiangong-1 fell on March 31, 2018. In the context of a period of significant tension in Chinese domestic politics. The timing was indeed discussed in relation to other events happening in China at that time. This is vague enough that you could argue it applies to almost any moment in Chinese politics. But it is also specific enough, the idea that the timing would be symbolically significant, that it is worth noting. And then YJ said other things. They said, in 2075, Japan's capital is not Tokyo. The capital of Japan in 2075, according to YJ, is in the western part of the main island of Japan. They did not say Okayama specifically in the version of the posts that has been most widely circulated. They said Western Honshu. They said a city that is currently considered secondary. Okayama is in Western Honshu. It is currently considered a secondary city. Two people. From different futures. Appearing years apart. With no apparent knowledge of each other. Both saying the same thing about where Japan's capital will be. I want to stop here and sit with this for a moment. Because this is the part of the story that I find genuinely difficult to dismiss. Each individual claim is explainable. Japan is earthquake-prone, so someone might predict a capital move for geographic reasons. China losing Tiangong-1 was already known. The 2062 earthquake predictions are ambiguous enough to be coincidental. But the overlap between the two people is harder. If one person says Japan's capital moves to Western Japan, that is interesting but dismissible. If a completely separate person, from a different claimed year, on a different platform, in a different language, also says Japan's capital moves to Western Japan, that is harder to explain. Unless they are both guessing the same logical conclusion independently. Which is possible. If the logic is, Tokyo is vulnerable to earthquakes, a future Japanese government would likely consider moving the capital, Western Japan is geographically safer, then two independent people might independently guess Western Japan. That is possible. YJ also said something about paper. They said, paper is rare in 2075. Most people have never touched a physical book. The use of physical paper in daily life has essentially ended. This is a specific detail. And it matches what the person from 2062 said. In one of their posts, the person from 2062 mentioned, in passing, that they had to be careful about certain things they said because some concepts required explanation that the people of 2010 would not have context for. Someone pressed them for an example. They said, paper. You still use paper for everything. In 2062, paper is for ceremonial use. Most people in 2062 have never written on paper. I had to learn what it was. Paper. Both of them mention paper. Two people. Two different futures. Both saying that paper, physical, everyday paper, becomes rare to the point where people do not use it. Is this a prediction? Not really. The trend away from paper has been visible for decades. Both of these people, whenever and wherever they were from, would have been able to observe that trend and extrapolate it. The disappearance of paper from daily life is not a surprising prediction. But it is the same prediction, made independently, by two people who each claim to be from a different future but agreed on the same detail. This is what I keep coming back to. I want to tell you now about what both of them said about the future that has not happened yet. The parts of their predictions that are still in the future as of the time you are listening to this. The person from 2062 said, there will be a third world war. It will begin as a conflict between China and Japan. India will be involved. It will be longer and stranger than what people think of when they imagine war. It will reshape the boundaries of what currently exist as nation-states in Asia. YJ said something similar. They said, the 2030s will be a very difficult decade. The structure of Asia will be different by 2040. Not because of sudden catastrophe but because of a long, slow process of realignment. Neither of them gives a start date. Neither of them says specifically when the conflict begins. Both of them say it is coming before their respective years, before 2062, before 2075. Both of them say Asia comes out of it looking different. Now, I do not know what to do with this information. I genuinely do not. I can construct a rational explanation for every individual element. The earthquake predictions were coincidental or ambiguous. The satellite prediction was based on known public information. The capital and paper details are logical extrapolations of existing trends. But when I look at all of it together, two people, two claimed futures, one set of overlapping details, I find myself in the same place that I always find myself with the best of these stories. The place where explanation feels slightly insufficient. Where the coincidence feels slightly too large. Where the question stays open just a little longer than it should. We are going to go one step further now. We are going to look at two more cases from history. One that was almost certainly a hoax. And one that was almost certainly fiction. And I am going to show you how even the fake ones tell us something real. Something about why we want this to be true. About what it means to look toward the future and try to see it before it arrives. Rest now. Let the two people sit in your mind, one from 2062, one from 2075, both pointing to the same things. Whatever they were, whatever they knew, they both pointed the same direction. And that is not nothing. January 2018. A new username appears on the internet. Not on 2channel this time. By 2018, the conversation had moved. Forums had evolved. But the same kind of anonymous, open space. And this person, who goes by YJ, says something simple. I am from the year 2075. And I have something to tell you. Now. The immediate question, is this just someone copying the 2062 person? Is this an imitation? A copycat riding the wave of a famous internet mystery? That's the obvious explanation. And it might be right. I want to say that clearly. It might just be someone who read the 2062 story and decided to do the same thing. The internet is full of that. But here's what makes it complicated. YJ made a prediction immediately. Not eventually. Not after a long thread of discussion. Right away. They said, the Chinese space station, Tiangong-1, will fall from orbit very soon. Within the next few months. Now, here's the thing. In January 2018, Tiangong-1 had been in an uncontrolled decay orbit for over a year. Scientists knew it was coming down. That wasn't a secret. What nobody knew, what the scientists themselves were still calculating, was when and where. Predictions ranged from early 2018 to late 2018. The window was enormous. YJ said, very soon. Within months. On March 31, 2018, less than 3 months after YJ's first post, Tiangong-1 re-entered the atmosphere and burned up over the South Pacific. Is that a prediction? Or is it just someone who read the news and made an educated guess? That's the question. And I don't think there's a clean answer. But I want to move past that prediction because it's not the one that keeps me up at night. The one that keeps me up at night is what YJ said next. They said, Japan's capital will move to somewhere in western Honshu. Stop. Read that again. Japan's capital moving to somewhere in western Honshu. Now go back to what the 2062 person said. Years earlier. On a completely different platform. In a completely different context. Japan's capital will move westward. Somewhere in western Honshu. I want you to think about what it would take for two different people, claiming to be from two different points in the future, to say the same thing. If they're both lying, if they're both just making things up, why would they converge on this? Tokyo has been Japan's capital for over 150 years. It's one of the most iconic capitals on Earth. If you're going to invent a prediction, Tokyo will stop being the capital is a strange choice. It's specific. It's verifiable. It either happens or it doesn't. And yet both of them said it. YJ also said, paper will become rare. Again. The same prediction. Word for word, almost. Paper becomes rare. A material that has existed for thousands of years, that is woven into the fabric of human civilization, becomes a luxury item. Both of them said this. One from 2062. One from 2075. And here's what's striking about that particular prediction, it doesn't feel like a dramatic science fiction vision of the future. It feels like an extrapolation of a trend that's already happening. But the specific framing, rare paper, not just less paper but rare, like a precious material, that's very specific. And both of them used that framing. Is there any connection between the 2062 person and YJ? Nobody has found one. Researchers who have dug into this, amateur internet historians, people who've spent months tracing usernames and post histories, haven't been able to establish any link. Different platforms. Different writing styles. Different details about the future. Overlapping on these key points, but diverging on many others. Which means one of three things. Either they're both lying, and they happen to lie in the same direction on these specific points. Or one of them read the other's posts and incorporated them, meaning the overlap is plagiarism, not independent confirmation. Or they're both telling the truth. Now. The first option is possible. The second option is possible. But the second option has a problem. The 2062 posts are well known in Japan. If YJ had simply copied them, someone would likely have caught that immediately. The overlapping predictions are not obscure. They're among the most discussed parts of the 2062 story. For YJ to use them would be an obvious and easily discoverable move. Unless YJ didn't know. Unless YJ came from the same future and simply reported the same facts, because they are facts. Because in the year 2075, the capital of Japan is no longer Tokyo. Paper is rare. and this is as commonplace as knowing that the Roman Empire fell. I want you to sit with that possibility for a moment. Not commit to it. Not believe it. Just sit with it. What would it mean if two people from different points in the future, with no apparent connection, independently described the same details about the world that hasn't happened yet? There's another detail from YJ that I haven't mentioned. They said something about the area around Okayama. They said that in the future, Okayama has particular significance. They didn't elaborate much. But here's the thing, Okayama is in western Honshu. The same region that both of them pointed to as the future site of Japan's capital. Is Okayama the capital? Is it nearby? Is it the new administrative center? Neither of them said clearly. But both of them pointed west. Both of them pointed away from Tokyo. And one of them named Okayama specifically. And that brings us to the third thing YJ said, the thing that echoes most disturbingly with the 2062 person. They said, there are difficult times ahead. For everyone. Not just Japan. For the world. Vague? Yes. But when you pair it with everything else they said, and when you pair it with what the 2062 person said about a third world war, it starts to feel like something more than a vague warning. It starts to feel like a pattern. There's a question I keep coming back to when I think about YJ. Why would you come forward and say you're from the future, and then immediately make a time-sensitive prediction? Think about the risk of that. If you're constructing a hoax, you want longevity. You want mystery. You want the story to stay alive as long as possible. So you make vague predictions. Things that could come true in the next decade. Things that are hard to falsify. That's the hoaxer's playbook. Keep the window of possibility open as wide as you can. YJ did the opposite. Within weeks of appearing, they made a prediction that would be verified or falsified within months. Tiangong-1's re-entry. Either it happened soon, or it didn't. It happened in less than 3 months. For a hoaxer, that's a terrible strategy. If the satellite had stayed up until late 2018, the prediction would have failed and the whole account would have been dismissed immediately. Why take that risk? Unless you knew. Or unless, and this is another possibility we should consider, you actually wanted to be believed quickly. You weren't playing a long game. You had something to say, and you needed people to pay attention fast enough for it to matter. That framing changes how you read YJ's posts. If YJ was trying to establish credibility quickly, one precise, near-term prediction to show they knew things, then the strategy makes sense. Use Tiangong-1 as a proof of concept. Then move to the bigger messages. The warnings. The predictions about the future shape of the world. And the bigger messages are the ones that overlap with the 2062 person. I want to say something about that overlap that I don't think gets discussed enough. The 2062 person and YJ are separated by 13 years in their posting history, 2010 to 2012 versus 2018. And they claim to be from futures 50 years apart, 2062 versus 2075. If they're both real, they should be living in related but different versions of the same future. Like a person born in 1950 and a person born in 1963, they experience the same century, but from different positions. In that framing, the things they agree on would be things that are already fixed history by the time either of them was born. If the capital moved in 2035, someone from 2062 and someone from 2075 would both know about it the same way you and your older sibling both know about things that happened before you were born. It's just history. And paper becoming rare, if that transition happened gradually through the 2030s and 2040s, someone from 2062 would have lived through part of it, and someone from 2075 would have inherited a world where it was already complete. In other words, if the overlap is real, it makes structural sense. Not as two people sharing notes, but as two people reporting on the same shared history from slightly different vantage points. I want to be careful not to overstate this. The overlap could be plagiarism. It could be coincidence. It could be a coordinated hoax. But the structural logic, if you follow it through, it coheres. And I think that coherence is worth noticing. There's one more thing YJ said that I haven't mentioned. They said, don't be afraid. Whatever is coming, don't be afraid. That's not a prediction. That's not a specific claim. But it's the thing that gets me every time I read it. Because whoever YJ is, real or not, they took the time to say, don't be afraid. That's not what a troll says. That's not what someone building an elaborate fiction says, unless they're doing something very specific with the emotional arc of the story. It's what someone says when they mean it. And whether they're from 2075 or they're just a person on the internet who wanted to say something kind in a place where kindness was rare, I think it's worth keeping. I want to tell you about John Titor. John Titor appeared on the internet in the year 2000. First as faxes sent to a late-night radio show. Then as posts on online forums. He said he was an American soldier, born in 1998, sent back in time by the United States Army from the year 2036 to retrieve a specific piece of computer equipment, an IBM 5100 personal computer, from the year 1975. The IBM 5100 was a real computer. It was introduced by IBM in 1975. It was among the first portable computers available to the general public. And it had a specific technical capability that John Titor said was valuable to his time. It could translate between different programming languages in ways that more modern computers had lost. John Titor was precise in a way that felt credible. He described the time machine he used, a device called a C204, installed in a truck, using two singularities to warp space-time. He gave technical specifications. He drew diagrams. He answered questions from skeptics in a way that was internally consistent. And he made predictions about the future. He said the United States would experience a second civil war, beginning around 2004 and lasting until 2015, in which the country would fracture into several regional governments. He said there would be a brief but devastating nuclear war in 2015. He said the world population would be significantly reduced. He said his time, 2036, was a world still rebuilding from those events. None of this happened. 2004 came and went without a civil war. 2015 came and went without nuclear war. The United States, however turbulent its politics, did not fracture into regional governments. John Titor had an answer for this. He said time travel creates new timelines. He said his predictions were accurate for his timeline, but that by traveling back in time, he had created a branching timeline, a different universe, in which the future would unfold differently. So you cannot disprove his predictions, he said, because the future he came from is not the future you are heading toward. This is unfalsifiable. You cannot prove it is wrong. And you cannot prove it is right. The investigation into John Titor eventually pointed to a Florida entertainment lawyer and his family. The language, the style, the timing, people who studied it concluded it was a creative fiction. A very clever one. A very detailed one. But a fiction. And yet, John Titor is still discussed. Still analyzed. Still treated as a mystery by many people who know it was almost certainly a hoax. Why? I think the answer is this. The story of John Titor touches something real. Something that has nothing to do with whether time travel is possible or whether a specific person told the truth. The story of John Titor is about a person who looks at the present and says, I can see where this is going. I can see the patterns. I can see the trajectory. And I am telling you that the trajectory leads somewhere difficult. This is a human impulse. It is one of the oldest human impulses. We look at the present and try to see the future in it. We try to read the signs. We try to understand where the path leads. John Titor gave this impulse a dramatic form. A time traveler. A machine. A mission. A warning. He made the act of looking at the future into a story. Now let me tell you about Andrew Carlson. In January 2003, a man was arrested by American financial regulators for suspicious trading. He had taken $800, a very small amount of money, and made 126 trades in 2 weeks. All of them successful. All of them in high-risk positions. At the end of 2 weeks, the $800 had become $350 million. The regulators could not explain how he had done it. The trades were too precise. Every time a stock was going to rise, he bought it. Every time one was going to fall, he sold it. No computer model, no amount of inside information, could explain the accuracy. When they brought him in for questioning, he said he was from the year 2256. He said he had come back from the future specifically to make money, because that was the easiest way to acquire resources quickly in the early 21st century. He offered, in exchange for his freedom, to tell the authorities something, a single piece of information about the future. Something he said would be valuable. He told them. The stories differ on what exactly he said. And then he was released on bail. And he disappeared. And was never found again. This is a perfect story. It is almost too perfect. In fact, it was a perfect story. It was a fictional article published in the Weekly World News, a tabloid known for fiction presented as sensational news. The Andrew Carlson story was not real. It was invented. But it spread. Before people could easily check whether a story was true, before fact-checking was a common practice, the Andrew Carlson story spread through the internet. People read it as real. People were fascinated by it. People repeated it. And this is interesting. Because the Andrew Carlson story, a fictional story, spread just as far and lasted just as long in the culture as many stories that were true. Which tells you something about why we respond to these stories. We want them to be true. We want to believe that someone, somewhere, has seen the future and is willing to tell us about it. We want to believe that the future is knowable. That there is information that can save us from what is coming. That somewhere in the world, there is a person who has been where we are going and has come back to warn us. This is not a foolish desire. I think it is a very human one. Think about what it would mean if it were true. If the people from 2062 and 2075 were real. If they actually came back. If the things they warned about, the conflict in Asia, the shifting of power, the world that looks different, if all of it is real. What would you do differently? This is the question that all time travel stories are really asking. Not can you travel in time? But if you actually knew what was coming, what would you do with that knowledge? The person from 2062, when someone asked them this question, gave an answer that I think about often. Someone asked, if you know what happens, why don't you warn us more specifically? Why don't you give us information that could prevent the bad things? And the person from 2062 said, the things that will happen are not caused by a single decision that could be changed. They are the result of many small decisions made over a long period of time. No single warning changes the trajectory. The future is not a single choice. It is an accumulation of millions of choices. Each one small. Each one seemingly unimportant. Each one pointing in a direction. I find this answer, whether or not the person was real, whether or not they were from 2062, genuinely interesting. Because I think it is probably true. The large events in human history, the catastrophes, the great changes, the moments where everything shifts, they are not caused by one decision. They are caused by 10,000 small decisions, made over years or decades, each one pointing in a direction, until the direction becomes impossible to change. And by the time the trajectory is visible, it is usually too late to reverse it. You can only prepare. Only adapt. Only make peace with the fact that the world you are heading toward will be different from the world you know now. This is what the person from 2062 seems to have understood. And what the person from 2075 seems to have understood. And what John Titor, for all that his story was likely a fiction, seems to have been trying to say. The future is coming. It will look different from now. The things you think are permanent will change. The centers will shift. The maps will be redrawn. Not because of one catastrophic moment, though there may be catastrophic moments, but because of the accumulation of a million small pressures, pointing in a direction. I want to close tonight with something that is not about time travel or predictions or internet forums. I want to close with the question that all of these stories are actually asking. If you could see the future, if a person appeared in front of you right now and told you, specifically, what was going to happen, what would you do with that information? Would you try to prevent it? Would you prepare? Would you change anything about how you are living right now? Or would you decide that the most important thing, the thing that the future cannot take away from you, is the present moment? The warmth of where you are right now. The people who matter to you. The ordinary things that fill an ordinary day. Because here is what I notice about all of these stories. The people who claim to be from the future, whether they are real or not, they come back to the past for reasons. Titor came back for a computer. Carlson came back for money. The person from 2062 came back, apparently, just to talk. And none of them say, come to the future. None of them say, your present is worthless, your future is better. They come here. To now. To the present. Which suggests that whatever the future holds, however different the maps, however shifted the centers, however rare the paper, there is still something here. Something in the present that is worth coming back to. You are here. In the present. Whatever the future holds, you are in the place that people, even from 2075, might want to visit. There is something in that. I think there is something in that. Let the forum posts fade. Let the predictions settle into the background. Let the questions stay open, because the best questions always do. You are here. Now. In a world that is still recognizable. Still full of ordinary things. Still the present. And the present, whatever futures may be coming, is not nothing. It is where everything starts. Sleep now. The future will arrive in its own time. And until it does, you are here. I want to talk about John Titor for a moment. If you've spent any time in internet folklore, you've probably heard the name. John Titor was a person, or persons, who appeared on internet forums in the year 2000 and 2001, claiming to be a soldier from the year 2036. He described a future where the United States had collapsed into civil war. Where a nuclear conflict had devastated much of the world. Where time travel was real and operated by the military for historical research. He was specific. He described the machine he used to travel. He provided diagrams. He answered technical questions with technical-sounding answers. And he predicted things. A civil war starting around 2005. A nuclear war in 2015. Waco-style conflicts escalating. The dissolution of the federal government. None of it happened. The Civil War didn't start in 2005. The nuclear war didn't happen in 2015. The United States, for all its problems, did not collapse. Years later, investigative work pointed strongly toward John Titor being a hoax, specifically, a creative project by a Florida attorney named Larry Haber, possibly in collaboration with others. The details were invented. The diagrams were fabricated. The whole thing was an elaborate piece of internet performance art, or an early experiment in viral storytelling, or both. And I bring this up because it's important context. The internet has a long history of people claiming to be from the future. Most of them are obviously false. many of them are provably false. John Titor is the most famous example of a time traveler story that captured enormous attention, inspired books and TV shows, and turned out, most likely, to be fiction. So why am I spending this much time on the 2062 person and YJ? Because the comparison reveals something. John Titor's predictions didn't come true. His timeline diverged almost immediately. By 2005, 2008, 2015, each landmark year passed without his predicted events. And the defenders of John Titor developed an explanation for this. He came from a parallel timeline. His future isn't our future. So his predictions apply to a different version of Earth. Convenient, isn't it? An unfalsifiable framework. If nothing comes true, it's because we're in a different timeline. The 2062 person didn't do that. They didn't hedge with parallel timelines. They made specific predictions, named specific regions, named specific dates, said, this will happen. And when it happened, the Kumamoto earthquake, the 3.11 earthquake, they didn't say, oh well, in my timeline it was slightly different. The prediction matched. The record is there. That's a meaningful distinction. Then there's Andrew Carlson. You might not know this name. Andrew Carlson is a different kind of time travel story, and a stranger one, in some ways, because it exists in a stranger space between fact and fiction. In 2003, a story began circulating, attributed to a tabloid called Weekly World News, about a man named Andrew Carlson who had been arrested by the SEC for insider trading. The story went like this: Carlson had started with $800. In 2 weeks, he had turned it into $350 million. Through a series of incredibly precise trades, every single one of them a winner. The SEC investigated. And when they brought Carlson in for questioning, he told them the truth. He said he was from the year 2256. He said he had knowledge of historical stock prices, because in 2256, they were history. He said he understood that what he was doing was wrong, that it could alter the timeline, but that he had taken a calculated risk because he needed the money to repair his time machine and get home. He offered to tell them the cure for AIDS. He offered to tell them where Osama bin Laden was hiding, in exchange for his freedom. The story spread. People wrote about it as if it were real. And then, Andrew Carlson disappeared from the record. No subsequent court filings. No trial. No SEC enforcement action. The Weekly World News story was, eventually, traced back to its source. It was satire. A fictional story presented as news in the tradition of that publication. But here's what's interesting: people believed it. Widely. Because the details felt right. Because the premise, a time traveler who uses future knowledge for financial gain, makes a certain logical sense. Of course that's what someone from the future would do. Of course they'd use historical data to make money. And the story spread because it felt true, even though it wasn't. I bring up Titor and Carlson not to dismiss the 2062 person and YJ, but to give you a clear-eyed picture of the landscape. The internet produces time traveler stories. Most of them are false. The ones that capture attention tend to be the ones with the right combination of specificity, plausibility, and emotional resonance. A person who appears unexpectedly. Who offers warning. Who doesn't ask for anything in return. Who speaks calmly about things that haven't happened yet. That template works on us. It bypasses our skepticism. It hits something older than our critical faculties. And the question, the honest question, is whether the 2062 person and YJ are another iteration of that template, or whether they represent something different. I genuinely don't know. What I know is this: 2 predictions came true. Precisely enough to be uncomfortable. The 3.11 earthquake. The Kumamoto earthquake. Named in advance. with dates and locations that matched. And two strangers from two different futures, with no apparent connection, agreed on the same things about the shape of the world to come. I want to end by asking you something. Not to answer me. Just to think about it. If someone from the future appeared online tomorrow, on Reddit, on Twitter, on wherever we gather now, what would it look like? Would we recognize it? Or would we do exactly what the people on 2 Channel did in 2010, scroll past, make jokes, go back to whatever we were doing? And here's the darker version of that question. What if someone is doing it right now, and we're missing it? What if the warning is already there, posted somewhere, time-stamped, archived, and we haven't found it yet because we haven't looked? I'm not telling you to believe in time travel. I'm not telling you the 2062 person and YJ are real. What I'm telling you is that this story doesn't resolve cleanly. It doesn't end with a clear explanation. 2 predictions came true. 2 strangers agreed on the same future. And the record is there for anyone to check. What you do with that is up to you. But maybe it's worth paying a little more attention. To the strange posts. To the quiet warnings. To the things that don't fit inside what we think is possible. Because sometimes, the most important messages are the ones that arrive looking like noise. Here's the thing about warning. Throughout human history, there have been people who claim to see what others couldn't. Prophets. Oracles. Seers. In ancient Greece, Cassandra was given the gift of prophecy by Apollo, and then cursed so that no one would ever believe her. She warned about the Trojan horse. She warned about the fall of Troy. She was right about everything. And no one listened. The Cassandra story is old. But it describes something real about the human condition. We are extraordinarily bad at receiving warnings. Especially warnings about things that haven't happened yet. Especially warnings from unexpected sources. We're good at listening to authority. Governments. Scientists. Institutions. If the weather service says a hurricane is coming, we evacuate. If a doctor says you need surgery, you listen. But a stranger on a forum, claiming to be from the future, we laugh. We mock. We move on. And I genuinely wonder, if that's by design. Not in a conspiratorial way, but in an evolutionary way. The human mind has limited bandwidth for threat assessment. We can't take every warning seriously or we'd be paralyzed. We've developed very efficient filters for dismissing things that don't come through official channels, that don't look like the warnings we're used to, that arrive from sources without institutional credibility. Those filters are mostly useful. They protect us from being manipulated. They let us function. But every filter also has false negatives. Things that should get through but don't. What if a time traveler, a real one, if such a thing is possible, what would they actually look like? They wouldn't have institutional credentials. They'd arrive with strange claims. They'd speak on anonymous forums because that's where they could be heard without being arrested or locked up. They'd give specific predictions to establish credibility, and most people would still dismiss them. They would look exactly like the 2062 person. They would look exactly like YJ. I'm not telling you that means they're real. I'm telling you that if a time traveler were real, we've built a world that would make it almost impossible to recognize them. Our skepticism, which is generally a virtue, would function as a perfect blind spot. And that blind spot, that space between what we're capable of believing and what might actually be true, is where these stories live. Let me bring this to a close by telling you what I think this story is actually about. Whatever you believe about the 2062 person and YJ, whether they were real, or fictional, or something in between, the story points to something true. It points to our relationship with the future. We know the future is coming. We know the world will change. We know that the things we take for granted, Tokyo as Japan's capital, paper as a cheap and endless resource, China as a unified superpower, are not permanent. Nothing is permanent. History has never stopped changing. What we're not good at is sitting with that knowledge. Really sitting with it. Feeling the full weight of how much could change in 50 years. The 2062 person and YJ, whatever they were, made people sit with it. Made people imagine the actual texture of a world 50 years from now. Made people ask, what will still be here? What will have disappeared? What are we not paying attention to right now that will seem obvious in retrospect? Those are good questions. They're worth asking even if no one ever came from the future to prompt them. And the predictions that came true, the earthquakes, the timing, the location, they add a layer of uncertainty that I think is also valuable. Because that uncertainty is honest. The world is uncertain. The future is unknown. And the part of us that wants clean answers, that wants debunked hoaxes or confirmed prophets but not this uncomfortable middle space, that part of us is uncomfortable for a reason. Because reality lives in the middle space. Not in the clean stories. 2 predictions came true. 2 strangers from 2 different futures agreed on the same things. The record is there. Time-stamped. Archived. Anyone can go and check. And the rest, the capital move, the war, the end of China as we know it, the world of rare paper and Western Honshu governance, the rest is still coming. Or it isn't. We'll find out. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the point isn't to believe. The point is to pay attention. To read carefully. To hold the question open. Because the future has a way of arriving when we're not looking. Don't be afraid. But maybe pay attention.